me move on and ask Sanjay to describe himself on his door right there and what's going on.
So I have a little thought experiment that I'd like to ask you to do, which is, here's a question. Why do car companies, rental companies like Avis, why are all the cars together at the airport? Why do they have these gigantic parking lots with hundreds of cars, right? Why? Why put them together like that? Yeah, Jasper. Yeah, people arrive there. But why not put them in the city? Why not have 5? Yeah, control. I would argue it's because of the keys. Someone's going to give you the keys. So you want one place where you can collect the keys and return the keys, and someone will go check the mileage. And so they put them together so that they can put that staff, the 2 or 3 people together. And the airport's as good a place as any, because that's where folks without cars arrive, right? But the moment the key could go electronic, the moment you could check the fuel electronically, what happened? Zipcar happened. What did Zipcar do? What Zipcar did was, it said, people don't want to go to the airport. You know, if you're a single, a young person living in Cambridge, you don't own a car, but you need a car occasionally to go to IKEA or to go to grocery store. You want it right across the street. That was enabled. The fragmentation of the car rental agency into thousands of locations was enabled by IoT. So when people say, what's IoT? Is it a technology? Is it a platform? Can I buy IoT? Is it a religion? Can I sign up? Is it a blood oath? We struggled with this. And the conclusion we came to was, IoT is not a technology. It's not a platform. It is a design language. Right? So the basic idea is, it is a design language for taking businesses, taking product-oriented businesses, where the customer is to bend over backwards to use the product, and redefine the business in a way that the business inverts itself and wraps itself around the customer and gives the consumer, gives the user what they want.
So let's talk about the Nest versus Honeywell.
So the Nest versus Honeywell, right? It's actually the picture, the previous slide. If you go back the previous slide, smoke alarms. I've literally had to do that to turn the damn smoke alarm off, right? Just connect it to the phone. And the way you could do that was IoT. And the thermostat, which is the next slide, which is the Nest versus Honeywell, of course, is a classic example, right? Which is when you connect something up, when you can use IoT as a design language, you can fundamentally reinvent a business. So, in summary, in our view, IoT is a design language. We'll talk about the vocabulary for reinventing a business to invert it from a product mindset to the mindset of providing a better experience for the customer.
And by definition, it's a paradigm shift. It's when needs and experiences drive what the product ultimately or the offering is going to be. So think about yourselves and your experience with Uber, Airbnb, where every action you take is actually developing things in the product. It is changing, as opposed to hardwiring and producing a fixed asset to sell to the market. So that's what the definition is. And this is what Sanjay is talking about. For decades in technology, we would sit around and wait for a company to come out and tell us what the new product is. Then we would line up to go get it. And we were bending over to try to understand and adapt to the product, whereas now companies are trying to adapt and understand. And there's a really good example, Mattress. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so, actually, Theodore Levitt, a professor at HBS, said about 40 years ago, he said, when you sell a drill, are you selling a drill or are you selling a hole? Because people don't want drills, they actually want holes. And so similarly, if you're a mattress company, do you sell a mattress or do you enable sleep? Right? So what's the sleep experience? The sleep experience is, if you want to invert it, I need to sleep. Well, if I'm tossing and turning, I'd like a report on it. And if I'm in REM sleep, I'd like the alarm, the mattress to tell the alarm to shut up and let the poor guy sleep a little bit more, right? And maybe if I get up in the night, I want the lights to come on so I don't stub my toe. That is how you think about the world in an IoT with this new design language. And by the way, if you think that's outlandish, there are now 2 or 3 companies that do this. I think there's a mattress company called Sleep 8, and they're doing very well. So this is a fundamental rethinking of a product into an inverted mindset.
Now, many of the newer companies, organically and ground up, were designed this way. Airbnb, Uber, Amazon for the most part, right? So when we wrote the inversion factor, we wanted to really focus. Our passion is to help traditional companies, which is about 99% of the industry, employing tens of millions of people, right? That are at this juncture needing to change. So what we're talking about are not necessarily those companies that already get it and are doing it right. But the thing we want to start getting you to think is if Zipcar had the idea and it could do it, why couldn't GM do it, right? Why wasn't Inversion introduced first by a car company? Why are technologies today introduced by startups and not by businesses that are the core owners? So there's a shift going from product, building static products, to needs-based, to experience-based that we want to explore. And there's one thing that's very important. In the new paradigm, in Inversion, vision is extremely important. Traditional companies tend to have extraordinary CEOs that run really good P&Ls, that know how to manage tens of thousands of people, that are necessarily not the ones who are going to decide what's my absolutely new product that has nothing to do with many of my other products, right? So vision becomes a key driver for us. So if you want to talk a little bit about the characteristics of Inversion.
Yeah, so if you look at Inversion, the key thing here is that actually, it's easiest to explain this with an example. Amazon, right? Amazon was founded as a book company. They sold books. And then they decided that the iPad was about to happen, so they introduced the Kindle. And then when the Kindle, once it released it, when the iPad and the iPhone arrived, they released apps on the iPhone and the iPad and Android, which actually hurt the Kindle. So the key takeaways are, first of all, what Jeff Bezos did was he went from selling books to owning reading. So that's the inversion, right? But in doing so, he showed that technology is not the issue. They'll use any technology to own the experience. You can't say I'm a mattress company. Sorry, that doesn't work anymore. You can't say I'm a taxi driver, right? You're in the transportation business. And technology has got to be used in any which way to deliver that need. And then, and of course, it's connected. Connectivity sort of enables a lot of that, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll talk about. And finally, it is fundamentally disruptive. And the problem with large companies is you have legacies, right? And it's very hard to swallow a disruption until someone else does it to you. And that's sort of, this is sort of old hat. Everyone knows about it. But with IoT, it's going to be inevitable because it attacks the product.
And probably a couple of other things is that obviously it's very data-driven. You've heard this a lot. It consumes data. The reason we have such a hunger or omnivorous about data right now is because we use that data. You've heard about things like machine learning, deep learning, collecting the data to train systems to begin to do things. And those are some of the differences between inverted companies or inversion mindset versus traditional mindset. The other thing that happens in inversion is brands are going to die. There was a time that having a brand was the stability of the company. If you think about Sears Roebuck, $60 billion revenue 1980s, dropped to about $5 billion, and now their debt exceeds their assets. Think about where Sears started versus where Amazon started. Think about why Sears couldn't have completely changed. It had the biggest online catalog before there was ever an online catalog, with a global market before anybody was doing internet commerce, right? When you fixate on your brand, if your brand is a store, if your brand is a particular mattress, if you're a car company thinking I'm going to sell a car versus everything else I could do with a car, and how is car going to become an experience as Tesla perhaps did, then that's really where there's a real issue with brands. So many of you sitting here are involved with brands, working with brands. And brand is something that's going to go, and at the end of this presentation, we're going to talk to you about what's going to replace brands.
And maybe I'll just say here that, if GM sold you electric batteries or electric cars, you'd laugh at it. But electric cars, you'd be like, oh, maybe. But electric batteries? A power wall? But if you go to Tesla, they install a solar roof. The Tesla brand is beyond a car brand. The Google brand is beyond search. Amazon is beyond retail. It's Echo and it's AWS. So it's not brand anymore. It signifies change rather than a particular product that they're locked into. Colgate is toothpaste, right?
And there's an example in the book that you'll read. Yes.
Sure.
One of GM's biggest business was its loan business. GM
That's true. That's true, yeah.
Which seems to me to be exactly the same sort of relationship.
Yeah, there are exceptions. Yeah, and NBC was in finance, NBC was in TV. So absolutely, there are always exceptions. But yeah. Yeah, so the question was, does GM had the GM finance business, as did NBC and as did many other companies. No, this is not about diversification. This is
For financing cars.
That's right, yeah. So we will certainly concede that there are exceptions to that, but more generally, right, the fact of the matter is that companies like Google, et cetera, they are sort of embracing a design language. So we'll just finish and then we'll come back to the Q&A.
So, if you actually also think about what businesses, maybe you're thinking what businesses are in jeopardy of being inverted? Banks with digital currency and cryptocurrency. Insurance companies. If I'm not going to buy a car, am I going to need an insurance? Hotel business. Airbnb is winning. More rooms are being sold through Airbnb per night than hotels. Maybe some stable businesses like airlines, et cetera, but we can go on the rest of the evening about everything that used to be a solid brand that's now, in jeopardy.
But Airbnb is inverted, but it's not IoT.
Correct. It uses some IoT features.
Yeah, and then eventually it became IoT because it was painful to hand the key over, so they went to electronic locks, right?
So when we started talking about inversion, we recognized very early that we needed a new vocabulary, a new design language, a new way of thinking about things. And in the book, we share these in detail with you. And there are 4 components that we're going to talk to you about here. And again, remember, inversion is the business practice change, and IoT is the enabler, the pivot. It's what makes it work. So go ahead.
So, yeah, thank you. So, obviously, when people talk about IoT, they talk about the Internet of Things, so it's connectedness. Connectedness is the first thought, right? Because everything's connected, your Nest thermostat's connected, it's remote control. Actually, when the remote control was introduced for televisions, it was a big surprise. And connectedness is what is associated with IoT, but we would argue that it's only a first step. What makes IoT actually very exciting is several other things. And the second one is computation. And the basic idea is that when we started with IoT, we only connected, but very soon we realized that you could put intelligence on the thing. So for example, a typical microwave oven actually has a very simple Intel processor on it, which could do a hell of a lot, but they turn the functionality off, right? But the moment that computation can be leveraged, you can start doing a fascinating number of things. For example, why doesn't a microwave, why can't it just scan the barcode on your product? Why do you have to enter the number in? It should be able to do that, but they turn the functionality off. And if you can unleash computation or intelligence, as we'll talk about it in a second, you enter a whole new realm. Can a coffee machine have an app store? That's sort of where we're heading, right, with this, and I'll give you examples of that if you're interested. The third piece of this is recruitment. So recruitment is a sort of a fascinating thing. Can the coffee machine detect that you're awake? Well, not really, because you're upstairs. But I talked about the smart mattress, and of course the smart mattress could tell the coffee machine. So could my Apple Watch, right? So the Apple Watch knows that I woke up. So recruitment, it comes from a neuroscience term, which is, the idea is that you can actually recruit the functionality of other devices. So things talking to each other or recruiting functionality across each other to trigger certain actions. So that's recruitment, and that's a sort of a profound and fundamental thing that we're beginning to see happen more and more in the IoT world. But the ultimate is immersion. Immersion is when things talk to each other sort of seamlessly, and actually a very simple example of immersion is this, the tile. How many of you have used a tile, right? So the tile, as you probably know, it's crowdsourcing, iPhones and Android phones which have the app running. And in a sort of an immersive way, this is being tracked for me. So those are the 4 stages. And in the next set of slides, we'll talk a little bit more about how these things come together.
Hey, just to be clear, what's interesting about the tile is not that it is a Bluetooth-enabled sensor, but that it hijacks all the members' phones to tell them all where it is for whoever wants to know that.
With privacy, unless you hack it.
Yeah.
And as you're thinking about these topics, we're using examples like microwaves and toasters, et cetera, but think about a world where there'll be tens of millions of autonomous cars on the streets. Those cars are talking to traffic lights, to parking spaces. They're self-directing themselves to things. Recruitment is critical because the ability, along with recruitment intelligence and being able to know what other devices to connect with, is pivotal, right? Because now you're talking about a scale that a human being can't do. So as we talked about this, we're going to talk about the progression of IoT. We started with things, and I'm going to use the simple example like a toaster. First there was a toaster. Then the toaster went on the internet. It got connected. An IoT device simply means it has sensors, actuators, it has some compute in it, and it's connected. That's the definition of an IoT device. But then, and that, we're going to talk about how that IoT began to break the boundaries of form. It started doing beyond. Once it got on the internet, it started doing beyond what it was capable. Then we move into intelligence of things, as Sanjay mentioned, when things now become intelligent. And there we break the boundaries of function. And in the book, we talk about how ultimately our view is that we're headed towards immersion of things, which is intelligent, highly connected things, where devices are no longer a device, they become experiences. So now what we want to do is we want to walk you through that as it relates to the 4 vocabulary terms that we mentioned. Now, this is a lot. We're kind of excited because we had our nirvana moments as we sat for hours working these out, so we want to share with you. So jump in.
Yeah, no, thank you. So the connectedness obviously is the first step. Things are, for today, if you take an inanimate object, the physical boundary is the boundary of its functionality and what it is. And connectedness, being able to access it remotely, at some level is not profound, but at another level, it just breaks the boundaries of what a product really is. Now, when you go from connectedness to composability, you enter a new realm. So composability is being able to change what the thing does. So, again, we're going to use these strike toaster sort of coffee machine examples because it's easier to explain. But, already in a coffee machine, you have sensors. And what's happening is a lot of sensors are becoming very cheap. For example, putting Bluetooth in is very cheap. Putting a microphone in is very cheap. Putting in a speaker in is extremely inexpensive today, thanks to the advances in cellular technology. So how difficult would it be for a coffee machine while I'm getting my coffee to play NPR? Right? Maybe it doesn't do it, but maybe you buy the functionality and suddenly it plays NPR. Perhaps it doesn't play NPR. Perhaps it triggers your Echo to play NPR when you turn it on because it knows that Sanjay uses his ristretto on his Nespresso machine. Right? So what happens with competition is you start getting into, the product has to have an API. Maybe it has an app store. One of the interesting things about composability is, in fact, the degrees of freedom are so great, we could screw things up. So one of the things we talk about, and has already happened, is what people call digital twins, what we call cloud things. So one of the arguments we make is more and more, things won't talk to other things. Things will talk to their avatars, and the avatars will talk to each other, right? And we call that mediated communication. So one example of that, in fact, we're surrounded by examples. If you have an iPod, you have an iTunes account. If you have an iPhone, you have an iCloud account. If you have an Android phone, you have a Gmail something account. If you have a Tesla, you have the Tesla cloud account. So already this is sort of happening. Right? There will be some local communication, but a lot of it will be mediated through the cloud. So that's what we call mediated communication from a composability perspective. The next step is recruitment. Now, for this, you need powerful computation. You need to be able to download an app, for example, for composability. But what starts happening now is that the hardware begins to get generalized. So, I was talking to one of my students is at Tesla. There's a lot of functionality in Tesla that we actually don't use, that they haven't actually revealed to us. I mean, it's going to be a software download. So I think what's going to happen is product companies are going to have to break out of the product mindset and put stuff in an anticipatory way with the hope and thinking about how they will leverage them at a future date, right? And so that's what we call generalized hardware. And every piece of hardware isn't going to be hardwired. It is going to be a service. So the microphone, the speaker there isn't there just to tell you when the coffee is ready. It's sort of available to you so that through an app, you can leverage it, for example, to read out the news, right? So it's a very different architecture for the product than the old product mindset. We're trying to save money, and all it does is this one thing in the most minimal way possible. And why should you do this? Because computing is cheap, right? Connectivity is cheap. You might as well design it to do something at some point that you never anticipated you might do. And you are seeing this now in more and more products, right? With the software download or downloading an app, you get this functionality. The ultimate is this immersive world. And immersion is very exciting. It's a little bit scary as well. And the basic idea is that things just happen. You know, you're listening to the news. Let's come back to NPR, listening to news in the car drives in. Sonos picks up the same news broadcast, follows you from room to room, right? This is not that difficult. It's not that far away. This is actually quite easy to do. But this is still without discoverability. This is still happening inside your home or your ecosystem. But just imagine if you went to the airport. You know, you have your 3 bags, and you want to go to the bathroom. You know, what do you do today? You pick them up, you lumber to the bathroom, you're sort of balancing them, putting them somewhere, right? What if you could just leave the bags there and recruit a camera to watch your bag seamlessly, right? Or do the tile thing. So that is the sort of immersive approach where you have discovery happening and connections forming in a very dynamic way. And we believe that is going to be sort of the ultimate goal, the ultimate sort of, aesthetic of the Internet of Things. And that immersive world, you have to take care of a bunch of things, recruiting, there'll be a lot of machine learning there, I'm sure, it's going to learn patterns, all that cool stuff is going to come together. But it also opens up other questions related to security and privacy as well.
Which we're going to talk about. You've all been part of why AI is so hot now, right? Why has, after 50 years, AI become so interesting? AI is actually not a new concept, right? It's because we're entering this highly intelligent, highly connected, highly immersive world, where the number of combinations, the things that happen, the examples that we're sharing with you, requires a lot of interconnections and intelligence decisions that have to be made. And that's why the takeaway is, yes, AI is going to grow simply because of the direction we're headed. Now, just to complete this, we also, at the very top, you see that we've talked about going from a product mindset to a needs mindset. And then you also see that these are the evolutions of IoT. So this is a lot. This is the middle chapters of the book that we've introduced to you because we really feel this is where we're headed. And also, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about privacy and security because it's going to be an issue to think about?
Yeah, so privacy and security, very interesting. I am actually personally terrified of some of the security holes that we're going to open up. The reason is that as we distribute computing, distribute networking, etc., we're really increasing the attack surface for malicious abuse, but also just foolishness, right? We just screw something up. And I want to give you an example. I was sharing this with Gideon earlier. We have an Alexa, an Echo, actually a couple of Dots and an Echo at home. And we also have an internet-controlled Schlage lock at home. And one day I was sitting, at home, and my kids' friends arrived, and they knocked on the door, and I want to get up. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to just tell the Echo, tell the Dot to unlock the door? And I was about to, in fact, I implemented it, and I unimplemented it right away because I realized that there was an unintended consequence. On a summer day when the window's open, someone can come from the outside and say, hey, Alexa, open the door, right? So that's an unintended consequence. Security and privacy as well in the Internet of Things are going to be just spectacularly complex problems. Our hardware is not designed for it. The way we verify isn't designed for it. Our intelligence in the system doesn't anticipate all the ways things could go wrong. Privacy as well, but that's more of a moral thing, right? Which is, where does Alexa own all my conversations? Or does she only own the conversation when I say Alexa? What happens if I have a car with a cloud, the digital twin, and I sell my car? one of the things we speculate about is certified digital shredding in the sky. Right? These are very fundamental sort of ethical, moral, technical questions that we are going to begin to run into. And honestly, we haven't thought them through.
The other thing we're faced with is who owns the security and privacy responsibility, right? So I was talking to head of security at Best Buy. Best Buy is now selling a lot of connected lighting, connected, this or, keyless locks. Is it Schlage? Is it Philips? Is it Best Buy? Who's monitoring that? Who owns the responsibility? Turns out it's Best Buy. They're not doing very well, right? But it's Best Buy that owns the responsibility. So a lighting company or a lock produces something, gives it to a retailer. The retailer has to then worry for it to work for you in your environment. The second complexity is when that comes into an immersive world, it's no longer operating independently. It's now operating with many other things that can create holes and attacks. So it's an unbelievably exciting time to be involved in this. I mean, I think security in the past was trivial compared to where we're going and what we're attacking. But enough of that. So as we continued thinking about all of this, then we had to look at some other things, which is, so where does a traditional company start? This is all good if I'm starting a brand new company, but where do I start? And we created a roadmap that you can read that goes through a number of steps. Step one, and the first biggest one is to identify, look, we recognize that traditional companies generate billions of dollars from existing product lines. So you're not going to abandon everything and go off and do new inversion, right? You still have to generate those billions of dollars. But identify the first place to look at it. Schlage Lock is an example of that. They're a lock company. They sell you door handles and locks, but they actually started an initiative for keyless doors. Hotels are going to remain hotels, but they started experimenting. So that's the very first step, but there's an entire roadmap, and it's not a trivial thing. To go from a traditional company that generates $200 billion a year to an inverted company that operates like another company, that's very difficult because there's a revenue line that also has to be met. Where am I going to bring the revenue? Am I going to go to zero revenue for 3 years to try something new hoping that it works? If you look at what's happening at companies like Amazon, they're constantly experimenting and learning with you. So those of you that have Echo or Google at home, your experience over the course of the year has evolved a lot because there's a lot of machine learning running in the background. But they're also prepared that if it fails, they will pocket that and move on.
For example, the Amazon Torch, I believe, which was their phone. I don't know if many... Fire,
that
was it
failed.
Fire? Yeah. So, I
and
actually
Echo
bought one.
arrived at your home
Right.
the week after, by the way.
Right. So they're willing to swallow the failure and move on.
Right. So, but we recognize that there are steps. The other thing that's very important to us, and we do recognize, is, look, innovation, technology, all of these are very, very important. But companies have to have the right culture, right? If the culture is missing, it doesn't matter how much technology and innovation or inversion you believe you need to do, culture can actually kill it. In fact, that could kill the entire advance of a company. So we believe that technology and innovation and culture have to go in together. Those companies that invert are those that the culture is very resilient, highly experimentation, they're okay, failure is okay, risk is okay. And that's really what enables inversion. And we also believe that traditional companies need to start looking about a new title, and we talk about this in the book. I was Chief Innovation Officer at IBM, a pretty big company. And my job was to think about how to innovate in pretty large business areas. But inversion is really almost like a permission to go through, do things completely in a new way. We introduced this when we were writing the book, which was a year ago. We're very, very happy that companies actually now have Chief Inversion Officers. And these are people that are coming in with the ability to make completely radical new shifts and new thought processes. So we believe there's a lot beyond technology that needs to be looked at. These are some of the examples of companies. Many of these you know. If you read the book, we go through a lot of examples. We also have 8 companies that have done case studies with us that they're mentioned in the book. But ultimately, I mentioned at the beginning that brands are going to go away. It's people, humans, experiences, and culture that defines the new brand.
Yeah, and in fact, I started with the Theodore Levitt example. Are you in the business of selling drills, or are you in the business of selling holes? By the way, can you think of a company that sells holes? I'm not talking about Dunkin'
Yes.
Donuts. Can you think of one? IKEA,
A lot of holes.
right? IKEA sells holes. So in a weird way, IKEA competes with Black & Decker, right? The more IKEA stores there are, the fewer people are going to buy Black & Decker because it comes with the holes pre-drilled, right? So that's a way to think about it. So for Ford, let's pick Ford. Ford, is it in the car business or is it in the business of getting people from point A to point B? And Uber came along and sort of startled everyone, right? Uber, I would argue, is an IoT company. The smartphone turns a dumb car into a connected, smartish car, right? So what did Ford do? So Ford acquired a company called Chariot, which is sort of like mega Uber pool. It's this big vans. It's like almost like a mass customized public transit, sort of like Uber pool. They acquired them because they know that they have to get out. They can stay in the car business for people who like to drive a Mustang. But the rest of the world's going to move to the transportation business, and they need to solve that problem.
And to close it off, all of us are now co-creators of the future innovation. Every time on your phones, I don't know how many apps you have, whether it's 20, 50, 100, every time you're using it, every time that an activity is going on, it's modifying. You're part of creating this new economy and what it is. So thank you. You have been great, and feel free to communicate with us on our website, theinversionfactor.com, and you've been a great audience. Thank you very much. Thank you. And right now we're privileged to have Gideon Litchfield, who will introduce himself first, do a provocative Q&A with us, and then we'll open it up for a discussion.
Just going to roll up my sleeves here.
Yeah, exactly. It's IoT. We're co-creating.
Thank you. So thank you very much for... Am I mic'd? Okay. So thanks very much for that very, very interesting presentation and great summation. And I have so many questions I don't really know where to start. But okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Gideon Litchfield. I am the editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review. And I've been that for about 6 weeks. I just moved.
And I have to say, it's already better.
I'm paying him a lot. And I moved, before that I was at various places and moved around various countries, and here I am now at MIT, and the thing that brought me here, I will just steal the thunder very briefly to talk about why I'm here. The thing that brought me to MIT and to Technology Review was the conviction that we need better conversations in society in general about how we build and use technology. And at the moment, the people who build it, the people who use it, and the people who create the frameworks for it, the regulators and the funders and so forth, I think are not having those conversations in the most well-informed way. And one of the results of that we see is things like what Sanjay was talking about, these tremendous problems of security around the Internet of Things, which nobody really has an answer for. So I think that the role of technology journalism is not merely to write about what's happening in technology and what's possible in technology, but also, or to even just to explain the implications of it. It's to actively seek to create better conversations and better informed choices about technology and how we use it so that it ends up benefiting more people and doing less harm. So that's why I'm here. And that's why I'm very interested to talk to you about all of this stuff.
Well done.
So I'm going to start with a short riff on what you talked about, which is going to start and end with a question. And the question is, how is this actually going to change our world? So let me talk about what I mean by that. You've described what are going to be some, or already are, absolutely wrenching shifts for companies that are seeking to serve their customers, their users, their audiences, however you put it. Complete turning inside out. Inversion is I think a word that you don't use lightly, and it's absolutely appropriate. I also think of it as like scrambling the eggs. I mean, the way that a company has to think about what it does and who it's serving and how it goes about it is going to be turned inside out. But what is that going to look like to the users? Because to me, the picture that you've described is a kind of radical re-engineering under the hood for a customer experience, which is not going to necessarily change that much. I mean, how how radically is my world changed if my coffee maker switches on when I get off my mattress, or if I can recruit a security camera to watch my bag so I don't have to lug them to the toilet. So I'm going to almost finished my riff. That is the question is how, if our experiences are only changing by incremental forms of convenience as a result of this radical engineering, is there some other way in which the world is being changed more fundamentally? And from what you were saying, it seems to me like maybe the answer is the most fundamental changes are the ones that are almost the unintended consequences of this, such as security. So to bring privacy and security in another context, we're all now aware of the fact that emails could be hacked, our text messages could be hacked. I have adopted a stance whereby I basically assume that my private life might get leaked. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty good about info security. But even if I'm not hacked, somebody malicious might publish my text messages or emails that I've sent them. And that's something that I have to live with, and I think I've noticed myself adjusting my attitude to my life. And for me, that's a much more fundamental change in some ways than what the technology has actually done for me. So that is how I'm leading back to this question. What is this really changing about our world?
Yeah, but I think there's an assumption in your statement, which I'm sorry, I just want to clarify quickly, Linda, which is that things are incremental. I would argue that things are actually pretty spectacularly transformative. I think, I'll give you a piece of statistics that I heard, we were going to put in the book, but I couldn't find a reference. Uber in San Francisco, before Uber in San Francisco, taxi sales were 200 mil. After Uber, taxi sales went to about 120 million, so it went down by 40%. Uber sales were 500 million. So if you think of Uber as a form of taxi, right, actual taxi sales tripled.
Yes.
Right. Now that is a huge impact to the car industry, to the rental industry. But I have students who live in San Francisco, live in Cambridge, who do not drive, who do not have driver's licenses, have no intention of buying cars, right? Who save time, right? Who don't worry about parking. And I think that to me is not incremental. Here's another one. 20% of all traffic in major cities, 30% sometimes, is people cruising looking for parking spots. If you could eliminate that, that's a 20-30% reduction in traffic and possibly in emissions and gasoline use. So I actually think these are not small. But having said that, I think your point is a good one. And maybe ask Linda to address it.
So taking this into another perspective, there's two other times, so let me bring a preface and then answer the question. Two other times in history of compute that we felt so insecure. Once was the internet came. Remember the days that nobody was ever going to do banking on the internet because it was highly insecure, right? And how often do you now go into a bank? What exactly do you now not do on the internet?
And it was that insecure, look at Experian.
Yeah,
But,
and we fixed it. The second such event was cloud. When cloud computing came, there was a concern, which is companies are never going to put their stuff on the cloud. It's never going to work. It's okay if Times Magazine wants to put their archives on because that doesn't matter. But no company is going to work on it. So I believe that these are concerns we have now, but we will address them, and human psyche adapts to it. But let me talk about a couple of other examples to the point of why does it matter. In 2020, there'll be more people over 60 than below the age 60. Over time, we're going to have a global elderly population. Connected cars are essential in mobility for that population, right? This is going to be a real issue. And IoT, the connection of the person getting the car, taking them, that's all what we're talking about. That's a complete different model than how you would work today. Another example, if you look at medicine. Today you go to the doctor, most the doctor is going to do is change your dosage and what you get. In the future, your DNA is going to be shipped to the pharmaceutical company based on your body chemistry, producing a version of that drug that works for you. Those are examples of inversion. So instead of the entire population buying that drug, now that drug is based on the need of the consumer. So while the examples we've used were some to exemplify the points, I think from a societal perspective, done right, we can actually improve quality of life significantly.
Right. I'm glad you brought up that medical example, actually, because one of the trends in medicine that we're seeing now is indeed more personalization, more precision medicine. And so if medical treatment becomes less about the product, the drugs that are the same for everybody, and more about the experience, tailoring the drugs, predicting your likelihood of certain diseases based on your genome, tailoring genomic treatments to you, and so forth, then inevitably, because it is tied much more to the individual person, the experience that's available depends on that person's economic power. And so isn't there the risk now that the more everything becomes experience-driven, the more inequalities increase, because now there is less and less, as it were, democratization of experience or a product?
I'll just do a quick answer and turn it over to Sanjay, but I think equally, if you look at how the insurance companies will respond to this, if it improves the health of the patient, requiring less insurance costs, then there's a democratization right there, because it's not based on your economic power, it's based on who drives it.
Unless the extent to which that benefit, to which you can get that improved benefit, that treatment, is itself dependent on your economic power. In other words, if you're richer and you can get the treatments that lower your insurance costs, you'll benefit from cheaper insurance, but the people who aren't getting those treatments or those tailored diets or whatever it is that helps them make them healthier will have more expensive insurance.
Equally so, I think if we look at something like medical imaging and some of the technologies that are now available at a lower cost in certain regions of the world, right? Technology has enabled it. But it's a good question. It's a good question. Does it create a societal ranking? Possibly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that this could create, as on the online guy, one of the things we're noticing is that who's taking these online courses? Who are the kids taking the online courses? They're the kids from Lexington, Massachusetts, Newton, Massachusetts, Winchester, Massachusetts, Palo Alto. It's not the kids that we thought, somehow this would be helpful for. So there's certainly, I think that's a huge issue which we have to deal with as a society, and it could apply here. But I do think that commoditizing, so for example, if your EKG that you put on your cell phone's a snap, at least from a diagnosis perspective, I think if we think about how we can reduce costs of treatment and intervention, maybe we'll address it. But I can't, there's no glib answer to your question. So it's a fundamental question.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about security? I mean, trying to look a bit further ahead from the issues you raised. How do you think we'll end up solving these problems?
I think we need some pretty fundamental questions. So for example, here's, take your car. Your car, if it's a post-2007 model, there's a bus. It's called CAN bus, Control Area Network Bus. And you have, your ABS, all these things sitting on the CAN bus. And they sort of talk to each other on this bus. But here's a fundamental assumption they make. So the ABS sends a signal to a computer. The computer assumes that the ABS sends the signal. It's sort of naive and, believing, it believes. But actually, if you take your car into a emissions test, there's a little port under, where you, in the wheel well, it's called the OBD port, Onboard Diagnostics 2 port. You can plug into it, and, that's what we do in our research. And if I plug into it, I can start hacking your car, because the car architecture on the canvas is so damn trusting. In a computer, right, in a bus, if the memory sends a signal to the thinking unit, right, or the thinking unit sends a signal to some other unit, they don't encrypt. They trust. So there's some fundamental assumptions that we need to start attacking. That's one. The second thing is the concept of the firewall, which we use today. We as humans have to deal with all these things. So we have a certain, there's AI, Linda talked about AI. We have a neural network in our noggins that looks for exceptions. We need to do a lot more of that. So there's some pretty fundamental rethinking of architecture, of security, even subsystem security that has to happen. Right. Operating system security, and I think we're wading right into this today.
Yeah. And security becomes even a bigger issue, Gideon, because when we look at that world where you have driverless cars, when things are going to do more than they do now. Right now we control things through apps, through our interaction. But the moment that my Echo is talking to my car, that's talking to my lock, that it's beginning to do that, then the points of attack start growing, right?
The surface area is larger, right? The attack surface is larger. By the way, there is one little twist to this. So a few years, actually last year I was watching the terrible attack in London where this crazy drove a car off the road and into a bunch of people. Maybe an autonomous car would have prevented that. maybe the autonomy of the car would have had more sense than the driver. So there's also pluses to it.
As always.
Yeah.
There always are. Okay, I'm now going to come to that section of the evening that I call When Buzzwords Collide. I just invented this. But IoT meets blockchain. Discuss.
Wow, those are two good buzzwords. I mean, blockchain. Probably everybody here is aware. It's a way of architecture. It's a way of distributing an application that it's secure. That you can see the source all the way to the end. It's irrefutable. Blockchain became very hot as an architecture with the advent of IoT. Because we need it. We're going to have points where data is going to go from point A to B to C to D, and we need to be able to know where's the chain, how did it happen. Bitcoin had a lot to do with it. So to me, I have to recall Ken because he had this great presentation saying why blockchain isn't anything other than another distribution in compute. So that's what blockchain is, and IoT, as we mentioned, is things on the internet. The real issue is, what do we do with all of this? Right? How can we do it for the good of society, for the good of us, right? It's great to put locks and everything and invert. Our point in the book has been to mindfully think about the purpose and how do we make things better.
Yeah, and I'll also add that Ken and I were very skeptical of that particular collision of jargon. I will say that recently there's a coin called IOTA, which has been coming up. And there's some talk about it. IOTA is a currency for paying for microtransactions. There's actually interesting work in microgrids, so maybe, but I'm still skeptical.
Yeah. The reason that I brought it up actually is also partly because blockchain is about dealing with a problem of trust, right? Blockchain is about you have a chunk of information, it's spread around a whole bunch of people, but nobody owns it, and yet there's a system for ensuring that that information has not been tampered with. And when you have a lot of connected devices that are trying to exchange data and dealing with problems like who has the right to enter your home or tell the lock to open and so forth, sort of intuitively it feels like blockchains must play some role in securing that, but it's not very clear to me what it is.
No, I've looked at it very closely, and I really want to see it there.
But you don't see
I don't see that they're there. And here's a fundamental issue. 10 minutes. It takes 10 minutes in the minute, right, for consensus.
On the Bitcoin blockchain.
On the Bitcoin blockchain.
Right.
Well, there is something called Algorand, which my colleague Sylvia McCulley wrote a wonderful paper about. So if they can get the speed up, but 10 to 20 minutes, my God, you can do a lot of damage in a house in 10 to 20 minutes. So
basically what we're talking about is the concept of miners in Bitcoin, where they have to actually come in, and they're individuals or systems that have to approve it. When you're talking about billions of pieces of data transacting on a blockchain architecture, then it's unlikely that we can get there. On the other hand, I will say that it has sparked interesting thoughts around what architecture should be. I really like the concept of irrefutability and knowing the source. So there's just like anything in science, we have to get the best of it, but you're right, these are two mega terms that can collide.
Right. All right, let's move back to the business perspective, because the way that you started out talking about this really is about how this changes how you think as an entrepreneur and as a business person. Does every business need to invert or think about inversion? Does the hardware store down the road or the coffee shop or I don't know, whatever.
what about the university?
Well, the university, sure. But,
Yeah, it has to.
But what about the smaller businesses? What about I don't know, does everybody have to be thinking about this?
Service industry is a little bit, I'm still going to enjoy going to a cafe and having coffee. But look at what happens to you in a Starbucks. That is a mega machine learning and deep learning environment. Everything around you is morphing, right? Is Starbucks, would it be the same as it is today if it operated as a coffee shop mindset? However, everything in there, how it interacts with you, what the temperature is, what music plays, people are interacting as they're there, and as they're saying, I love this track, it starts playing it elsewhere. What's occurring in a coffee shop is inversion in action. If I'm a hardware store, I'm going to die. Amazon's going to sell everything. So is there a business that's immune to that? I think the answer to that would be to the extent that consumer experience doesn't matter, that business can survive. But the moment consumer experience happens, then it poses a threat and a need for inversion.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there are a lot of middlemen in any service delivery, right? You have a need, and there's all that stuff has to happen, and sometimes a pain to the customer. Travis Kalanick and David Camp, who I'm not by any means recommending as icons of behavior and so on, but nonetheless, the way the Uber was founded was Travis and David were apparently waiting in some European city, and it was sleeting in Paris. They can get a taxi, and one of them turns to the other and says, "I wish I could do this." And a cab showed up, right? So the hardware store's got to figure out what business is it in. The other day I needed a couple of Dremel tools, Dremel bits. And that was the end of the weekend. I wasn't going to go to a hardware store. I just ordered them on Amazon.
What were you doing with the Dremel bits?
Well, that's a whole other story. I was using great stuff, the great stuff. It's not great stuff. Anyway, so I just need those things. And the hardware store has stopped serving that purpose because it takes me so long to go into a Home Depot, find it, right? Find parking. It's cold. So I think actually e-commerce, which is killing retail, I expect in the next 5 years, you will see 100 major retailers die, painful deaths, unfortunately.
Yes.
Right? Is a form of that. So hardware store better won't worry.
I had to fix a leaky pipe in my kitchen the other day. And so I did go to the hardware store on the corner, and I was very glad that I did, because I'd looked up on the internet a video of how to fix the pipe in the kitchen, and I sort of understood it. But then I went there and I explained, and I took pictures of the thing that was leaking, and he said, "Oh, no, you need this part, and you need that one as well." And he wasn't trying to sell me too much stuff.
Yeah.
The point was, there was a human expert. There was a human who was able to engage with me on my very specific problem in a way that an Amazon couldn't do it.
Yeah, but if you clicked on the YouTube, let's say that there was an ad in the YouTube video that you saw.
Right.
That said you click on it, and the package shows up in an hour. Would you have gone to the hardware store? Maybe not. I mean, maybe you would have, right?
Right.
Well, the other story would be I go to Home Depot, but I really can't find anybody to help me because there's not enough people, but a chatbot, an avatar, is willing to talk to me and tell me what video to watch to fix my pipe. So, it depends.
We exchanged emails, Linda and I, and you brought up some examples of smaller companies, not the ones that everybody knows, but smaller companies that are great examples of inversion. Do you want to talk about a couple of them?
I mean, for example, we feature a book called, a company called Roadie, which is a guy that was trying to just transfer tiles from one city to the next. And he realized he couldn't. And he started saying, "Hey, what drivers have trucks that are available? I have some stuff to move." And that created that entire business. What you've seen in the bicycle sharing, motorcycle sharing, these are all examples of companies that started with a what-if concept. In London now, if you are eating anywhere, I went to a fancy restaurant. I was very proud I had gotten in. I got back to my hotel and then saw a guy by Deliveroo, which is the biggest delivery company there, delivering food from that same restaurant to a guest in the hotel. I felt really dismayed because I'd spent 3 hours going there. And I asked him, "How does it work?" And he said, Deliveroo basically has a concept, any food for anyone from anywhere, right? And they make deals with these restaurants. So it's almost like it's limitless, the number of opportunities. So we feature a bunch of examples, and probably people sitting in this room, probably going through your head is all these ideas you have of things you can develop.
Before Amazon acquired Whole Foods, my little fantasy was that, what business is Whole Foods in? Is it in the grocery business or is it in the nourishment business, right? And so I was thinking maybe Whole Foods should acquire MyFitnessPal, and essentially it gives you, and Blue Apron. You acquire MyFitnessPal and Blue Apron, and every day when you go home, there's a customized meal waiting for you that you cook, sort of as a family, right? I think these things are going to happen.
Maybe Whole Foods should have acquired Siebert as well. Yeah. I want to challenge on you on this thing, the statement that brands are going to die. This is killing brands. So maybe the question is what kinds of brands, or what you mean by brand. And again, there's some context to the question. A few days ago, I was at the MIT Media Lab at the Center for Bits and Atoms, which is run by Neil Gershenfeld. They have a network of essentially fabs around the world, 1,000 workshops with 3D printers and all sorts of other machines for making stuff. And here's long-term vision or his hope is that what this would lead to is that people start to manufacture a lot more locally. Supply chains become shorter. They manufacture for their communities in these fabs. This wrecks, lays waste to a lot of the world's manufacturing companies in Neil's vision. But what it doesn't lay waste to is the very biggest brands, the Nikes, for instance, because they are the ones that figure out how to invert, how to recognize that they are not tennis shoe making companies or whatever. They are, in fact, whatever it is, a sports experience or a fitness enhancement company or whatever, or a lifestyle, something. The point is that Nike manages to be the source of designs and inspiration and so on for these manufacturers, and therefore it continues to live. So what do you think about that? Which are the brands that make the change or the transition? Or what does it mean for a brand to die, or which brands die?
So when you ask the question, to us, brand is whatever limits you, right? When we think about an Amazon, we think of Amazon today. Is it book distribution? Distribution in general? Is it Echo at home? Is it a movie producer? What is the brand? There's no limitation. There's no constriction. To us, brand in this definition is constriction. If I look at Nike, my question is, Nike could have been in health food business. Nike deals with, as long as you're selling me a shoe unaware of who I am and what my experience is, you're selling me a shoe. That brand fails. My expectation of my shoe is one that's measuring how far I'm walking. Am I comfortable in it? Maybe connecting to my smartwatch to take measurements. So in a sense, Nike as the brand is limited, right? So now they're putting wearables and sensors, but it could have gone far, far beyond that when you consider how long the brand has been there.
There's actually an example of this. Colgate about 30 years ago tried to introduce food.
Try to introduce?
A packaged food thing. And people didn't want to eat it because they felt it would taste like toothpaste.
Because Colgate's brand was so associated with toothpaste that nobody could imagine eating food. When brand becomes too much of the definition of who we are. So the question for the audience is, do we need brands? Is there a need for brand? Is it a need to say Amazon is? Because if we do that, we're going to have to list about 1,000 things.
If you don't need brands, do you not need customer loyalty either?
You need names.
You need names. So
But what we tend to do is we brand to a product. It's sort of the product-orientedness of brands. That's sort of how we think of brands, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So experiences will drive it. It's how often you go to Amazon and stay on Amazon versus do you know what Amazon is?
Right. Look, I'm an Apple nut. I've got this. I've got my iPhone. I have an iPad. I have a, And so I know that Apple really creates a wonderful experience. So that's what I associate Apple with. I don't associate it with this particularly.
Yes.
I associate it with the fact, by the way, this is a wonderful example of immersion. So you can actually unlock your phone, your laptop now with your phone. And when I get a call on my Apple AirPods, I can, say, speak here. So that's what I associate Apple with, not with the particular product.
Right.
The other thing brands do is they really limit you from experimenting outside because the thing you might want to do is so different than what you are. So the question we had to struggle with, is there really a benefit of a brand in terms of the future business in Inversion?
But you still want a name.
You want a name.
You want a name.
You want a name.
Yeah.
You want something that creates trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
That enhances my experience.
What is the, so you talked about.
Sorry, just to be clear,
Yeah.
this is brand like in P&G, brand manager, Oil of Olay.
Yes,
Right.
got it.
Or something else.
Brands as products.
Yeah.
You talked about the Chief Inversion Officer and you talked about being Chief Innovation Officer. Both of those jobs involve the problem of how do you change a culture. So maybe for the people who are coming out of MIT, some of them might be thinking about startups and some of them might be thinking about going into big companies. But in all of these big companies, you have that problem of cultural change. And in the place that I worked before, Quartz, a very innovative business news website, we didn't have we very purposely didn't have somebody who had innovation in their job title because we said innovation is everybody's job.
Right.
So it's like I'm the chief ethical officer. The only person who needs to be ethical in the company.
Exactly.
So that's a really good question. First of all, I just want to push back a little bit. Culture is an issue in a company of 2, as it is in a company of 100 or 100,000 or bigger. the perception that culture is only that of a big company is really, really not true. If you go to Silicon Valley and walk into some really great companies, startups, small, they could be 10 people, you will still see that difficulty, that ability to be willing to experiment. So innovation is around bringing new things. I was involved at the time in introducing Watson. Watson is coming out. Watson was a culmination of many things that happened at IBM, now coming out in a new product. But IBM as a company now has to completely redefine itself, right? It has to figure out what spaces it's playing in. How is it playing in this evolving world? Can it remain what it is? And there needs to be somebody to come in. And you're very right. That person is not changing the culture. That person is opening up opportunity. Cultural change, the other sort of my 2 cents is that it's top-down significantly. We always talk about it being top-down, bottom-up, and everybody's involved in it. People need degrees of freedom in order to really change culture. Cultural shifts happen in academia. You want a top-down, heavily controlled environment, MIT, any university, right? So as long as we don't give people degrees of freedom to experiment, to be okay with failure, if we're judging success by did you do the right thing or acceptable thing, that's true. So yes, an inversion officer is not going to change the culture, but if a company truly wants to invert, it has to give somebody the ability to come in and figure out these really crazy new things.
Right. But then how do you, I mean, speaking from your own experience perhaps, let's say you've been appointed the inversion officer of a company, and you're coming in and you're trying to open that space. How do you go about it concretely?
So you would need budget, you would need a team, and you're basically rewarded and understood that you're going to go after these new things. You're opening up new opportunities. And it's a very clear mandate, just like you're running a product line, except now you're running an experimental product line.
But
right?
you're not doing it as like an isolated experiment within
No,
the
no,
company.
no.
You're doing it as something that you're trying
Yeah.
to affect what everybody does.
Yeah, I mean, let me sort of mention to everybody who probably already knows this. Amazon AWS right now is one of its largest product lines. AWS was an experiment about 10 years ago by 2 engineers who opened up a server and said, wonder what happens if you open up a server at Amazon. Will people want to come in and do something? That's an example of degrees of freedom, right? And then it's the degree of freedom to take that beyond that, to create a new business line, right? To not say, I don't think it's going to work, therefore I'm not going to invest in it.
By the way, AWS is about $9 to $10 billion, and it subsidizes all the shipping costs that makes Amazon competitive with Walmart. You take that away, right? Somehow the math sort of breaks down.
Yes. As you pointed out, Theodore Levitt had this insight, or reportedly had this insight about you're selling the holes, not the drills, 40 years ago. Amazon has been around for, what,
20 years.
Some of these other companies. So what is it that's happening now that is creating this? You're saying it's IoT, is basically the enabling force.
Well, actually, it's a design language of which IoT is a very significant part, but also machine learning and other things as well.
Right.
And social pressures,
And
the
yeah.
fact that now humans, all of us, we have very different experience requirements than we did 20 years ago.
I'll give you an example, actually. It's a very nice example of Ring Central, which many of you may know of. It's the doorbell. But it's based on such a beautiful little insight, which is if someone breaks into your home and there's someone inside the home, it's, I think, a felony, right? It's basically, if they break in and there's someone inside, it's a much higher level of crime, and your penalty is much higher than if you break in and there's no one inside. So the first thing a lot of burglars will do is go ring the bell.
Right.
So what did Ring Central do? They said, we'll put a camera there. You ring the bell, we take a picture of you, and we display it on your phone or whatever. Bam, right? And it just took off.
Right.
So the point is that you couldn't have done that 10 years ago. You couldn't have done that 15 years ago. But all the doorbell companies, right, that make doorbells,
Right.
sort of missed that.
Right. Because they didn't think they were security companies. Right.
They didn't think it was secure.
And at the same time, the companies that are most involved in things, if you take ADT, was the last to come to the game in terms of monitoring these things.
Right.
Who should have a camera on your door, if
And-
not your security company? But ADT's answer to me was, that's not our core business. Our core business is to make sure that your house isn't broken into when the alarm system goes off, but a stranger on the door, right? That's just an example of how far I'm not willing to go.
Right. Interesting. So last question from me, and then let's open this up. can you put on your crystal ball glasses or whatever those might be? Can you think of what might be the next, if it's in 20 or 40 years, what is the next fundamental shift that is as fundamental as what you're talking about happening today in terms of IoT and this new design language enabling inversion?
So I'll say something controversial and hopefully scary, which is that a lot of companies say, we're not in IoT, I'm not, I have machine tools, I'm not in IoT. Guess what? A lot of the machines are connected to a computer, and the computer is connected to the internet. So the proprietary things, they're not IoT, but some bad guy knows that it's connected and is going to use the design language, right, to do bad things. So because the person who owns the system did not even contemplate, acknowledge, or show intent in this regard. Unfortunately, what's going to happen, and this is the scary part, is the next war will be fought without a single bullet being fired. Country A will bring down the grid of country B. And by the way, it happened in December of 2015 in Ukraine,
yes.
2016 actually, this is 2018, 2016, right. Where it's thought the Russians brought down the Ukrainian grid. So I think we're going to have some really unfortunate incidents, and there's going to be a wake-up call. And we're going to have to redesign a lot of the ways we think of security.
For me, in 40 years, if we were looking at it, we wouldn't be having this discussion because things would automatically be connecting, intelligently integrating. Things would happen. Our role become more of ethical policing and watching out to make sure that things are happening, should be happening. Because what we haven't talked about today on the AI front is really the ethical, social, moral, many of these things that we have to think about. We also haven't talked about robotics, how robotics are going to be part of our lives, and the integration of that into everything that's going on. Augmenting robotics augmenting humans. So I think we're going to have this complicated world where I see ourselves, hopefully, intelligent beings in moderating to make sure the right things get done.
And actually, on that thought, one of the things we say in the book is, so what's a self-driving car? Is it a robot? Check. Is it machine learning? Check. Is it IoT? Check. Is it computer vision? Check. So the point is all these things are converging as well, to Linda's point.
Right. Okay. Well, with that, let's have some questions. Please come down to the microphone so that the people on the live stream can hear your gems. Sir.
Great conversation. My question is, as I see the younger generation connecting with all of these things, which is why I'm here actually, what does it do to the human side of how we're disconnecting ourselves with each other? I mean, just an example, in my lunchroom, before phones came along, we would be talking and having a conversation. People are sitting there, everybody's on their phones, right? So how do we work on connecting each other with IoT?
Francis, put your phone away. No, I'm just kidding. I think that this is a very fundamental issue, and I say this as an educator. I do believe that I actually think that in fact, Sherry Turkle's written extensively about it, and there's some neuroscience research that shows it. It's fundamentally rewiring our brains. So that's a fundamental issue, and it's not just IoT. It's just phones actually, and we need to think it through again as a society. In fact, as you might have read, Apple shareholders, significant shareholders, asked Apple to take cognizance of the fact that they were changing society, especially amongst young people. So I think it's a huge issue.
Very good point. Yeah.
One of your slides talked about embracing a hacker mentality, and I was just wondering if you could expand on that, especially from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah.
What can be done from an entrepreneurial perspective?
It's sort of design thinking. Eric Ries, basically being very quick in cycling through. I mean, the typical company, they go, oh, let's think of a product. And 18 months later, they're testing it, right? But today, you pack it up on a Raspberry Pi, you pre-tail it, not retail, you pre-tail it on Kickstarter. Kickstarter, a lot of people think it's fundraising. It's not. It's a way to see if people give us a damn about your idea, right? It's need sensing.
So in the traditional companies, the reason we put this in there is to truly embrace it. What doesn't work, just my pet peeve, is for a large enterprise to hold a TechCrunch conference at the conference, a hackathon, put 2 problems to be solved, none of the findings then go back and change anything. Okay, that's not hacker mentality. Hacker mentality is sitting there on a Friday night, jerry-rigging something, you don't know it's going to work, then putting a little bit more money into it, then really working on it. And what I see in large companies is a lot of PR around hackathons. And that's what we talk about as a true hacker mentality, like entrepreneurs would have, because entrepreneurs don't have a lot of resources. We believe that big companies have to also embrace it, to test, fail, grow, and not just run hackathons. Good question.
Thousands of tiny failures as opposed to a
Right.
few big ones.
Right.
My question was about your opening metaphor, about being in the whole business as opposed to the drill business. Isn't it true that even if most businesses change their model that way, somebody still has to be
Yeah.
in the drill business? Somebody
Yeah.
still has to make the drills? And how's that going to shake out? Is it going to be the most efficient drill maker who survives?
I think so. I think that it's already happening, right? I mean, there are still people who do quaint things, right? The question is that the lifestyle you want to be in? And for some companies, that's fine. So there will always be a need. You know, there are still companies that make LP, record players, right? So there's always going to be a niche market. But the question is, if you're betting a future on it, be prepared to be a niche. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I appreciate that you address the concerns around security and privacy, but I wonder if you've given some thought to the concept of safety. You know, and very similar to the example that you have provided, and certainly in the medical device world, if you imagine you have a lot of connected devices, they're all working perfectly the way they're supposed to, and yet there is some sort of unintended consequences. And as a result, is that going to require us to perform, if you will, a case testing analysis to ensure that every device that could possibly be connected together is working in a safe environment? And does that exponentially increase the testing requirements before these things can be safely deployed in the field?
I think that's a profoundly important question. And so what happens so you have the security world, cybersecurity world, and then you have safety testing, etc. In cyber physical systems, the two come together. And that's just an incredibly scary thing. That comes back to my earlier comment. The bad guy is going to use the design language to exploit safety issues, right? Like driving a car off a cliff, overheating a reactor, etc., etc. So there's a model. Microsoft has something called Stride. There are a whole bunch of frameworks for analyzing security, and there are models for designing safety, right? For cars, for example. And actually, I have a project with a major car company right now, and we're trying to pull the two together. It's actually, well, I wouldn't say combinatorial, but it really makes the analysis of your design complex, because you have to intersect every security issue with the safety issue.
Well, and then it will depend on other devices.
Absolutely.
And if you think of the future world, Linda, that you outlined, where you have devices automatically connecting to other devices, that their interaction would not have been tested in advance,
Yes.
so the results could therefore be
Yes.
unpredictable.
Safety is a very, very important issue. But the other one that I would just throw out there is relevance, right? When things start getting connected to things, where are the boundaries? What exactly are we intending to do? How far can we go? In environments that we control things, we define those boundaries of even a device, right? So those would be safety, and relevance would be something to look at. But you're right. I mean, we will have, look, we're entering a new world with a brand new set of, what does the DMV test for a connected car look like, right? In other words, before your connected car comes over, hopefully you're getting a message that says this car passed 99% of something, because what if it just didn't? What if some dude just put a car out there that came over to pick me up? So there's so many things we don't know. That's both the excitement and the anticipation. Thank you.
Your comment about the DMV test for a connected car, raises another meta question that we haven't touched on, which is, what is the role of government and regulation in any of this? In the sense that the way that government thinks about, for instance, how to make people safe,
Right.
is itself also very product-focused. It's about objects and keeping people safe from objects.
You're touching on something that's so important to me. I've probably been to 20 to 30 connected car conferences from the AI perspective and others. There's never anybody from the city, from transit authority. It's fascinating to me because nobody's there talking about, even when you think about, you recognize that traffic lights are going to completely change. It's not going to be yellow, red, and green. It's going to be sensor oriented. Its role is going to be not to stop and flow. It's going to be to redirect and optimize. So how are those things being thought about? If you actually sit down with the CTO of Los Angeles Airport, highway system, the transit authorities, they're really smart. They are thinking about things because these cars have to survive on their highway systems. Yet we don't have them in these discussions. So government from regulation, but also from ethics, boundaries, policy, those have to happen, and they're not happening at the right level.
Yeah, actually also the half-life of a regulation, the half-life
Yeah.
of a regulation used to be comparable to that of technology. But technology is changing so fast that I think we're sort of at a strange place now. For example, I was in Bangalore 3 days ago. Uber is actually, strictly speaking, illegal in Bangalore. But the demand is so high that the government is scared of banning Uber because there'll be riots. Right.
Can you come closer? Sorry.
I worry about parenting in a world where there's so much technology. About 3 or 4 months ago, I have a teenager. I have 2 teenagers, but my daughter comes home and she told me, I'm really upset about something. And then she went to her room and she spoke to Alexa for a few minutes rather than speaking to me. And then she came back and said, I feel a lot better.
You just gave Amazon a brand new product idea, Alexa therapy.
So,
Do you know what she said to Alexa?
no, and that worries me. So the data has been shared with Alexa. So I worry.
She ordered herself a new iPhone. Made her feel really good. That's what happened.
So I worry about a couple of things there. The control and the data that children are sharing with, these connected devices, and also internet-connected toys, for that matter. So, any thought that you might have would be wonderful, because I worry about the emotional. I think the gentleman before alluded to that connectivity that's coming out. I mean, there's a lot of positives that I see, but this idea of sharing more with a device rather than with your parents is a little daunting.
You're talking about a few things, although I must say that adults have the same relationship with Alexa than kids do. And also, many people don't know that they should really unplug, that mute is not necessarily the right way. Mute does go off, and I'd be surprised. I mean, we're sitting at dinner parties with 3 echoes running around, and people are sharing. I mean, in business meetings, there's stuff around, right? So it's the introduction. I mean, I think, we could have some words of wisdom, but I would only ask to see whether this is a technology issue or a family issue. Is it parenting, or is it blaming the guilt?
No, it's not a family issue, not Rita. It's not.
No. But the point is, but in general, right? We're morphing as a society. We're dependent on devices. We're also at the same time getting a lot of information.
Yeah.
Just because millennials are looking at the device doesn't mean they're on Facebook. They're actually searching constantly. And it's possible 10 years from now we might find that the neural capacity of the millennials are higher because they have infused more information at any one time, as opposed to waiting and going and reading. There's constant infusion. So you're asking a very good question. I think that I would love if Echo would arrive with a red sheet explaining to people how to plug and unplug, explaining where the data goes, because many people, unlike you, don't know that the data is being stored, right? So those are really important questions.
By the way, there was an incident last year of a Burger King ad, and what it would do, as you probably know, is on TV, it would ask Google Voice to tell you everything about Burger King. And so they could make that ad short, and then Voice would go on for like 10 minutes telling you Burger King.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. Evil, but brilliant.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the discussion so far has been assuming that everything works beautifully. I'm a technologist, and everything doesn't work beautifully. So, in fact, you build these beautiful constructs in your head. You say, oh, school will be canceled. There'll be an automatic notification that school is canceled, that your child needs to go home. You know you can't go home, but you have a play group, and the Uber is going to organize the transport to the play group, and the refrigerators will talk to each other so that there's snacks, and one of the parents will be sent there so that there'll be a parent there. It's never going to work, okay? Unless it's a specific app, because the assumption seems to be that you put out an API out there and it just works, and that it's scalable and everyone can talk to the API and they all work together. You know, I've worked in B2B integration efforts, and here you are, you're dealing with, I'll make up an example, let's say 10 rent-a-car agencies.
10 what?
Rent-a-car agencies, and you want to automate bookings or something. You know what? Every single one of them needs a slight tweak to the integration. It just doesn't work the first time. So when you multiply that exponentially, literally exponentially, you have n different devices with m different possibilities, m to the n combinations, and all this. How the hell is it going to work? So one possibility, which I think of the dystopian possibility, is that you end up with little colonies. You have the Apple colony, you have the...
Well, it's already happened. It's called a walled garden, right?
Exactly. You have the walled garden solution. So the Apple walled garden, the Google walled garden, and so on. Another is the standards one, where you wait 10 years, and by that time it's 9 years out of date, or maybe 11 years out of date, and so on. Where are we going with this? Is there, in fact, going to be a mechanism for integrating things scalably?
Yeah. So I mean, my quick summary of that. First of all, there's a sort of a false romance that Zigbee and 6LoWPAN and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. First of all, why do we need 6LoWPAN and Zigbee and Z-Wave, and you need them. Here's why. It's actually a multi-dimensional space. Power, latency, bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera. And each of them occupies a different piece of it. That's one. The second thing I'll say is that hardware interfaces are brittle and difficult. If you think software interfaces are bad, hardware interfaces are very brittle. That's why we talk about going to the cloud. So the idea is you make the thing just talk to its avatar, right? And that's the one thing it does. So its attack surface is very minimal. Web interfaces are much more malleable, and there will be a lot of difficulty. But actually, if you've used IFTTT, if this, then that, right? If you've done stuff like that, what we're finding is that web interfaces, the rough edges get shaved off very quickly. And hopefully, it'll be a shorter time frame, but there's no magic bullet. This is going to be stuff that shakes out. I will say that within the walled gardens, they work pretty well. And I've worked in the space quite a bit, and it's actually worked quite well.
The other way to look at it is things are sequential. So let's take an example of Mercedes-Benz and Car2Go, right? In the first instantiation of Car2Go, these really sort of cute cars that appeared in places, they introduced X number of cars per city, but they had no idea how the cars were going to be used. So you would take the car from location A and drop it off in 200 miles away, but nobody wanted it 200 miles away, so Mercedes had to go get it. In the next sequential, they started learning where are the cars most likely being picked up and dropped off. In the next instantiation, it was how am I going to open the door? And when you now go to the car, it already has the contract, opens the door, you get into the car. And now it understands it enough to get there. So when we're talking about inversion or these things, it's not overnight. It's not a one time you have to fix it. What's happening is society is tolerant now. We're tolerant with the incremental changes and iterations. We like playing around because remember, we're no longer consumers of technologies. We're curators and co-innovators. We thrive on the fact that we can take something and make it better. We're almost challenged. You're challenged. You will use it simply to show that it doesn't work.
I hate spending half a day
But when you do that, it's actually teaching. So I would only say that what I see in all of these is highly incremental, and the clients that I work with are taking major bets, but approaching it in an incremental manner. And the difference is now society is comfortable with experimenting and getting there as a possibility.
I also think that there'll be verticals. So for example, as many of you probably know, delivering packages. You can either leave the package outside your home and it'll get stolen depending on where you live. You can give Amazon an electronic key, which I would not recommend. Or you need a locker. And a very convenient locker is your car. Because your car has more computers than your home. So the car becomes a delivery point. So, the interface between delivery trucks, drones, and cars, that'll be sort of cleaned up quickly. But the end-to-end, N choose N choose M connections, I think we'll have a lot of rough edges.
And on that note, Mercedes also tried to come up with a creative way for delivery, which is when it arrives, it automatically unlocks your trunk. The problem is if it stays long enough, then somebody can get into your trunk. So therefore it experimented with another way and abandoned it. And we just don't hear. These things are happening so much, you don't even hear when something comes in and goes away based on experiences.
Most cars don't have a way of automatically closing the trunk.
There you go, exactly. Hence the point, yeah.
Jasper.
So I have two questions. So my first one is we have a lot of cross-pollination between different industries, like software industries and like fridge industries. And like I know that there could be a situation where a fridge can download news update and then the fridge doesn't work. That's not too good. And I just want to hear your 2 cents on that. And also I see the inversion mentality of consumer-based thinking really could help the education industry, and I just want to hear your thoughts of the implementation there.
In the education industry?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the education thing and I'll come back to your question. The education is going to change fundamentally. Education, the fact that you have to come into MIT for 4 years, well, that's worth it, but most schools it's not worth it, all right? And I think that what will happen is, you need education when you need it. Actually, you remember it better, you apply it, and so on. So virtual reality, just-in-time education, this is the future. Online, of course, is a part of that. Education has to invert itself, and in the midst of doing that at MIT, we've really taken giant leaps. Coming back to your first question, I come back, it all comes to Stavros, right? Your question, which is that the challenge we have is we used to tolerate a lot of crap because we're used to it. The three-finger salute when you probably don't remember this, you probably don't know this, but when your Windows computer crashed and stopped responding and you had to do the Control-Alt-Del, right? You still have to do it, but we do it less and less because this is the great legacy of Steve Jobs, frankly. He taught us not to tolerate that crap, right? And that has become pervasive. Actually, it comes back to Stavros' question as well. So because consumers involved, not professional IT folks, consumers get upset and they move. And that competition, I think, has really reduced that. But it'll happen, comes back to Stavros' point, and there'll be rough edges. And consumers will go towards the product that doesn't crash. Right? And that's why, and the solution to everything is Apple.
Although there is a question raised around that, which is, companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google are succeeding by being essentially the dominant player in their fields, meaning consumers have nowhere to run.
Yeah.
So, does that competitive, and this is raising questions of how do you define antitrust for this day and age. So, is that not a feature of the kind of economy that we're talking about, that becoming
The convenience economy.
that a company success means becoming dominant, not being just one of the players.
It's an avalanche effect. Yeah, one ring to rule them all.
A simple example, I don't know how many of you used the very first buttons that Amazon had, like the Tide button,
I did.
right? So that was a simple
The
IoT
dash,
device that
yeah.
goes back to, what was his name? The gentleman that just asked questions? It was right here. The last question. Oh, you.
Oh, Jasper.
Oh, Jasper. So you were asking the first question, which is the enterprise, how these companies integrate. So what happens is when you press that button for Tide, Amazon is placing an order with Procter & Gamble that is shipping you something across a logistics company through a delivery company to you, and all you did is you invoked it by pressing Tide. Well, the next rendition of that became the skills in Echo. That started out with 1 or 2 skills. Initially it was lighting, then it was speakers, then it was electronics, then it evolved into thousands of skills now. Anything that's IoT enabled, effectively it's like the Tide button now accentuated. And it's driven by, to your point, on the convenience, right? Because the consumer is more. So the question is socially, societally, as we're striving for convenience, how are we going to displace players?
But it actually opens another question. So there are now 15 million Amazon Echoes, Dots, etc. Who owns the word Tide? So what if Amazon decided the word Tide actually belongs not to P&G, but to Unilever? It's their product. Tide is an English word, just a few syllables, right? So that comes back to the brand question, right? What does Tide mean? Who owns it in Amazon's ecosystem? Or can Tide say, no, I want the Amazon call word is mine. Can they assert that in court? Right? So there's a fascinating new thing about what brand means in this world.
And how intellectual property is defined.
And how intellectual
Right.
property is defined.
So there's one important issue to how IoT will impact our lives in the future that hasn't been discussed at all yet, and that's how might IoT enable us to transition our energy systems in a way that we urgently need to address the challenge of climate change. And so what
We don't have a climate change problem. Newsflash.
yeah
It's all fake
Yeah.
news.
Yeah, it's all fake news. No, but that is a very important question. And
Go
that
ahead,
is the
go ahead, yeah.
question.
yeah, how might IoT allow us to address that challenge? And just kind of imagining
Right. So-
yeah.
So I'm deeply involved in that, as it turns out. We didn't write much about it in the book because there's so much to write about. But so, for example, the number of rooms in this building where the lights need not be on. The number of rooms where the heating is on and there's no occupant, right? That's just right there. In most buildings, and there are many articles about this, the heating and the cooling are often on at the same time and annihilating each other just because of bad controls, right? Microgrids, solar farms, right? Selling power back to the grid, smart grids, smart water systems. I mean, the opportunity is stunning from an energy savings. I use the parking example. 20% of all traffic is called cruising, looking for parking. And that you're just burning energy, right? So the opportunity from not just energy, but in my view, resources perspective, sustainable development goals of IoT, I think the opportunities are just magical because we have been extremely bad stewards of this planet and we better get better at it.
To your point, actually IoT started back in RFID. Industrial use cases like that were some of the drivers for us to try to understand, to get your utility company to talk to you so that we don't leave our homes with all the lights on and all the plugs in, right? And we leave home and then suddenly we get our bill and wonder, why did that happen? Well, that is the natural resource of this planet. I don't think we've done a good enough job. I think that the economics of it is a question. And you're bringing up a very good question, and we should do much, much more about it. You're right.
Thank you.
Who's on the side?
Fantastic. Sanjay and Linda, thank you so much for coming. Sanjay, you made a great example about the heating and air conditioning being on at the same time. Do you guys have examples of IoT or new technologies that you feel would have been implemented relatively easily that have failed? I'm just trying to think of some, like maybe Amazon is a great example because they're such a giant, but the Fire Phone.
Yes.
The Fire Phone,
Give us
yeah.
some examples of IoT where it hasn't worked out.
For me,
where you might have
without
seen
a doubt,
also?
it's patient care. We have struggled for decades to, something as basic as communicating your metabolic and your diagnostics with doctors, with hospitals. We have avoided it, refused it, challenged it, and we collect data off of 15 devices that we carry. But that pivotal moment where that data needs to be communicated, integrated, go back and say, wow, there's a spike here that you may not be aware. We have refused that, and I think in healthcare and home health, patient care, we have, and that's very much been my pain point, a failure of IoT.
I would completely echo that. In every space, healthcare tugs at the heart, make an impact, financial savings, lives saved. It's a disaster because our healthcare system is so complicated. The incentives are so messed up. The training is so sort of siloed. I think many, many examples. Also AI, right? AI is graveyard. The first graveyard was healthcare.
And I would say followed by natural resources, food and other things, yeah.
By the way, the MD Anderson thing for IBM Watson, right, where they thought AI would change everything, didn't. Hopefully we will finally make inroads in healthcare, but it's a graveyard.
Right.
So one of the fundamental underpinning premises of a lot of IoT is mobility, right? And today, largely, the way we get mobility is through wireless networks, mobile carriers, guys like that, right? Today, IoT is a very, very low-margin business for the mobile carrier. Fine. Unfortunately, we just got rid of net neutrality, right? So what effect is that going to have on it when people start saying, we talked about walled gardens earlier, that was the crippling effect of the early mobile web, right? It wasn't until walled gardens kind of disintegrated that we started having all this innovation. Do we run the risk of setting the clock back, if you will, if we lose all this connectivity to rules that now are no longer in play for things like neutrality?
Like what sort of, like net neutrality?
Yes.
Sorry, how would that lose us the connectivity?
Well, because now as a mobile carrier, right, I can say, okay, well, you have 10 internet connected devices, I'm going to charge you $50, right? So now the value of my connected coffee pot or whatever it may be, it's not there any longer, right? So a lot of these things, really, really cheap connectivity is essential, and really ubiquitous coverage is essential. And so how do we keep advancing these networks while there's got to be a business model, I guess is really the question, is what is the business model for IoT?
Mark had a clarification as a telecom guy.
Come to the microphone.
Mark, can you come to the microphone?
Sorry, I have to reject a little of the premise of your question. I've got about 62 million devices that I've put up on, sorry. Nobody really wants to hear me, right, Vanessa? But I've been part of a team that's launched about 62 million devices on cellular networks. I will tell you that it's not a low-margin business. It's a fantastic business for mobile operators. They're not scared of it. They're embracing it. They're actually starting to, if you look at what Verizon's doing, I'm not trying to steal any thunder, but
No.
it's a fantastic business. They don't have to subsidize a device like an iPhone. The enterprise is actually putting in and paying for a thing with a modem and a module. So these are great offerings that operators are doing, and that's why they're active in it. And you probably, on the coffee example, you probably wouldn't put your coffee pot on a separate cellular connection. It might be part of a home hub, which would then haul that back over cellular. Yeah. And then you have the operator's last point, and then I'll sit down and shut up. But you have the lower cost networks that are now rolling out. NB-IoT is the name of one standard, and there are other standards that the operators are really jumping on. So it's a great business. That's why operators are very engaged with it. Just wanted to kind of help out there on that.
And maybe, Mark, I'll just add that there's NB-IoT, there's, Jamshed, where's Jamshed? There's Jamshed, right? There's like all these LTE standards. Then there's something called LP-WAN, low power WAN. And what will end up happening is if you get a cable box in your house, it'll be a base station for a half-kilometer radius for LP-WAN. That's one piece of it. But the other thing is, I think that a lot of IoT devices will go to subscription models, right? So every time you put a Nespresso pod in a coffee machine, let's say I'm just making this up, right? A little part of that cost is the transaction cost. So it becomes much more of an annuity business. So I think we're going to see some very fundamentally different business models. All these carriers have been through hell and back, and they're all wising up to this. And I think that a subscription like sort of per use, not for the home because you have your Wi-Fi, but in the
bucket for
yeah, right.
raw 10,000 asset trackers or something like that.
Right. By the way, one example of this is the Kindle. When you buy a Kindle, it comes with cellular connectivity, but you don't buy a cell phone contract, right? You don't buy a cellular contract because every download baked into that is an AT&T cost.
So your question was actually a really thought-provoking one because independent of things that their connection is not threatening, Kindle, if Wi-Fi goes down, it's okay. Coffee machine, it's okay. I think about the time that there are 10 million cars out there relying on the internet, right? And what happens at that moment when internet goes down? When everything is dependent on that, right? So we need mechanisms to switch carriers from one to the other. And there's a company by the name of VeloCloud that just got picked up by VMware last month, whose task was to basically modulate between carriers, right? So what it does, it gives rise to that, but it is a concern. If any of us have been at that moment where you're sitting when internet goes down, look what happens to airports. I mean, it's sheer chaos,
Look
right?
what happens to my teenage daughter.
Yeah.
Sheer chaos.
Right, so, yeah, exactly. Facebook might be down. I mean, what will we do? Oh my God. But in the true immersion of things, in the world that we're talking about in 10, 20 years, there's a mega dependency on a connectivity to connect us to the source. So what that's going to lead us is to bring a lot more to the edges. And I think that that's a very exciting area, to bring compute close to the edge and eventually closer to the device, eventually one car to the other. And we've always played around with peer. We haven't really gotten there. So we're going to be pushing compute closer to where the sources are because we can't depend running things onto a server in the cloud.
By the
but
way,
it's a very good question.
My students, we just implemented TensorFlow, which is a machine learning software on a Raspberry Pi. You know, it's getting spectacular what you can do on these things.
Last question, and then we will wrap up.
Sanjay, Linda, having worked with you both for a long period of time, even and talked to you many times, it's just sitting in and listening to you guys is always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I feel
Likewise.
like I learn a lot every time. So, and I was very touched, Linda, that you started by acknowledging and recognizing Ken.
Jamshed was a very close friend of Ken as well, yeah.
So, in the book, you guys talk about the consumer experience and you know, how that can be sort of, how that was sort of the epiphany for even the Zipcar sort of opportunity, right? And that really resonated. I thought that was a wonderful sort of thing. My concern was with the question the gentleman in the back asked. Yes, that one.
Stavros.
And Sanjay, your answer was that it's sort of walled gardens and we're going to live within these walled gardens. That scares me because I have an Alexa at home and I have a Google Home at
I know. I listen to your conversations.
So I'm the one your daughter talks to. Sorry, bring it back. She's my niece. So my question is.
Take that off of the streaming video.
Sorry. So how are we going to deal with this? This is
right.
At a consumer level.
Right.
It's not okay to have these walled gardens because now everything in our lives is going to be touched, as you guys have described. And if there's walled gardens, then my car is not going to be able to talk to my garage door opener or to my lights or to my Amazon. How is this? What do you think the right way is to get solved?
So just from a protocol perspective, I think the wall gardens were a good start because those walls actually protected us much as it helped Apple because I didn't trust a lot of these vendors. I do trust Apple, Amazon, I trust, although there was a security hole when they introduced the electronic key, but you know, they fixed it quickly. So the walled gardens were good, but they were a necessary evil. It doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? They were good only in the short term. But what has started to happen is that the self-declarative nature of discovery has become more secure. The handshakes have become more secure. So now if you turn your Amazon Alexa, your Echo on, and you put a LiftX bulb, they will discover each other. And they're quite secure the way you can connect them. So the walled gardens now have very secure doors. So I'm actually not saying walled gardens are good. I'm just saying they were better than the alternative, which is a free-for-all, right? One of the other challenges we have is Trojan horses. So if you get a camera to your house, right, you just buy something on the internet, that, not out of malice, just out of, just incompetence, may have a security hole. And a lot of systems are composed of, something you bought from Malaysia, something you bought from this country, you put it all together, and the firmware has a security hole. So walled gardens, in that respect, also provided provenance for software and hardware. And so they were secure from that perspective. I think we will get away as we develop awareness, security measures, et cetera, and as the protocols become more interoperable, coming back to Stavros's point, and we are going there. But I prefer the route we took than the free-for-all.
And beyond apps, beyond cloud and telcos and carriers, let's remember what happened this week with Intel's meltdown, right? We have security breaches and meltdowns at a chip level. Computers are made of chips. If those chips have fundamental flaws.
The chips are down.
Right. Chips are down. right? So when you think about the level, it's not just the cloud, the internet, the app, Echo, Alexa, it's down to the chip that goes inside a computer that enables all of this, that gets the carriers to work. This is right now one of the largest replacement of chips that's going to ever happen. And there could be more. There could be AMD chips.
And that was Intel. Now
Yeah.
think about the unnamed chip in the camera. By the way, that's what led to the Mirai Net botnet attack, which is a bunch.
What's that? All of them,
Well,
worldwide.
anything in inventory they're going to have to do, right?
But it'll take
It'll take a long time.
Yes.
To flush the system.
Okay.
So on that cheery note,
On that cheery note, I am supposed to sum this up somehow, and I have no idea how to. So does either of you want to round it off in some way or leave some final message?
Linda.
I think, this has been a great journey. There are many things that we need to still understand. For me, it's extremely exciting because it's the first time that I think we're seeing sort of technology put to good use. There's many things we don't know. We want to elicit thought conversations with you as you read the book. Please get in touch with us. Let us know what you think. But these are things that we're trying to get answers to and figure things out. So
Yeah.
with that,
Yeah. And I think we're in the beginning of the beginning, to misquote Churchill.
Yeah.
So
thank you very much.
thank you. Thank you.
And there is now yes.
Just one last note, we are doing networking upstairs in the R&D pub, so before you crowd the stage, come
Crowd
on back
upstairs.
up.